At this time, I want to turn it over to Dr. Quallich. She's going to present the details of our plan. One thing I did want to mention, and I talked to Mrs. Pavlik about this before the meeting, typically in work sessions, technically we don't have to take questions. Our board doesn't do that. Our board wants the opportunity anytime we get it to be able to answer people's questions. I am anticipating that we could get a large volume of questions tonight. So my recommendation with questions is we have Mrs. Busby is going to be reviewing those, and we're going to try and answer some of the more common overarching questions rather than going through them. And again, I'd ask parents who have questions to submit those online, which will be in the document you're going to be receiving at 8 o'clock. Dr. Quallich?
Good. Mr. O'Cull's going to be steering the document. So again, it's a working document. So I think what Mr. Sable said, that's the most important piece of this, is that we'll be adjusting the document as things come up. But for the most part, a lot of the pieces are in place, and he's shared a lot of them. So this is the introductory piece, and I think Mr. Sable shared we created this document in collaboration with the health department, with neighboring districts, and with the guidelines from ODE and the state. So at the end of the document, you can see the documentation we used. So if you keep going down, Vanna O'Cull, thank you. This is the level system from the state, and I think it's really important that the community knows that the schools can only run based upon the level system that we're at. So I think Mr. Sable made a very clear point. The only reason we're able to come back at a regular level is because we are allowed to socially distance the students 3 feet apart. So that's the only way we're able to come back with all our students. If we weren't allowed to do 3 feet apart, we would not have the space to bring the students back. So that's why we're able to do that. So if you keep going down, we wanted to make sure people had access to that.
Yep, and I just want to emphasize again that with the color system, if we're in a position of red or purple come September, we're going to follow the guidelines that we work to put in place. So we want to stay in that yellow and orange and get everybody back.
Yep, absolutely. So in levels 1 and 2, which would correspond to the state's yellow and orange, again, as we shared, because we're allowed to use that 3-foot distance, we can bring students back 5 days a week. So as Mr. Sable said, if people in the community can continue to follow the guidelines and we can keep rates low, we can do that. We can bring students back 5 days a week. If we move into the red level, then we're looking at either an online 2.0 or the hybrid model, because at that point, if we have to keep students 6 feet apart, then we're going to have to move to the hybrid model, because again, our buildings aren't big enough to be able to keep students 6 feet apart, meaning our classrooms when I say our buildings. And then again, this isn't us dictating, it's the health department and the parameters of the pandemic dictating what model we're in. And then again, for all of our sake, if we're at the purple level, we'll be fully online because we can't have students in the buildings at all. So then I know there's some questions about Medina Digital Academy, so I want to make clear when you see the document, this is the link you'll click on. You do need to commit then by semester. I know those were some of the questions I can clarify. You do commit a semester at a time. So if you commit this first semester, you can change your mind for second semester. But when you commit, you are committed for that entire semester. I know someone had asked, if you say yes now, can you change your mind before school? The answer to that would be no, because we have to get a solid count of how many teachers we're going to need. Once you commit, then you're fully committed. Just a couple other things so that I can clarify if we weren't clear enough. That you can participate in extracurriculars because this is a Medina City Schools online academy. You would also get all your special education services if you enroll in this because, again, you are our students, so you would receive FAPE. If you want to go down to the daily symptom assessment, what we're going to do here, or up, sorry, I said down, I meant up. So the most important thing we know is that in order to prevent the spread of COVID, we need to make sure students and staff aren't coming to school with COVID. So on a daily basis, we're going to ask our staff and our students, and if any of you have athletes, you know we're doing that right now, is the COVID symptom checklist. So every day we're going to ask parents, and then we're going to ask staff to review the symptoms and take their temperature. And that's, if you go down a little bit, Ryan, a little bit more. Right there, daily symptom assessment. So we'll be asking families to assess their students and then staff to assess as well. So it's not just the temperature, it's also the symptoms, which is why we won't be taking students' temperatures at the buildings, because we need parents to check on the symptoms as well. In terms of social distancing,
Dr. Quallich, I'm sorry. You mentioned the symptom checklist, so will parents be provided with a checklist?
yes, so two different things. We're going to provide parents with the symptom checklist, and we're also going to provide a video and some professional development for parents from Akron Children's Hospital as to how to go through that checklist. So it'll be a quick video, but we want to provide some information from Akron Children's. Any other questions about that? Then in terms of social distancing, I think Mr. Sable shared about this. We're requiring the 3 feet social distancing, 6 feet whenever possible. But again, the 3 feet comes into play in our classrooms in order to allow the students to be in the classroom. We're asking at all times adults have masks on when leaving a room. Student desks are going to be 3 feet apart and facing the same way. We're asking that student desks not be in groups. So furniture placement is going to be handled on a building level, and I think Mr. Sable shared this, but each building will also have a more detailed plan that parents will have access to. I think he shared by August 1st we'll have those to review. Students maintain 3 feet distances in hallways. As a lot of you have seen at some of the local grocery stores, I know at Giant Eagle it's hard to remember which way you're going down the aisle, but we're going to do that in our hallways as well. And I think that's why Mr. Sable shared that we're going to plan for some practice with our students as well. We're going to suspend locker use at the middle and high schools, and then at the elementary we're going to work with the students to minimize that space, because the less time you can get students congregated, the better. We're going to work at each building to minimize this time that students are congregated in the mornings and in the end of the day. So that'll be different for each building, which is why they're going to work on that at a building level. In terms of the cafeterias, we're going to have students be at least 3 feet apart while in the cafeterias. This could vary from building to building. At the elementary, they may be eating in the classrooms. At the high school, we could expand eating places so that the students might go down and get their to-go lunch and then we might use the Mecca. We could expand different places to eat so that kids are spread out more. Again, we're looking at the spacing areas. So again, we'll have individual plans per building. In terms of the restrooms, there's going to be a limited number of students allowed in the restrooms, staggered restroom times, and then we're going to ask staff to be present in their doorways during any transitions to make sure there's social distancing in the hallways. I know masks are important to staff. We're going to ask staff that they wear masks at all times unless they're alone in their classrooms. So very similar to what you see in businesses now. Unless you're alone, you're going to need to have your mask with you or on you. There's been some questions, so we did work with the health commissioner about the face shields, and I know that was also in the governor's description. They really aren't a replacement for masks, but we are allowed to have staff use them at certain times. So at the elementary level, it's helpful to have those so you can see phonics instruction. It's helpful for speech therapists if they're doing articulation. So there will be some exceptions where those can be used instead for limited times, but not for an entire day. In terms of specific masks, students in grades pre-K through 5 are going to be asked to bring masks, and the district will provide in general for kids that forget them. But pre-K to 5, students will need to wear masks on the bus, when entering and exiting the building, in hallways, when moving around the classroom, when in small groups, and when one-on-one with a teacher. But they are not mandated at all times. We also want to address with parents if there's an issue where a student's continually refusing to wear a mask or a parent is refusing to have a student wear a mask, we're really going to have to work with them to move to our online option. because in our district, mask wearing is going to be required at those times. So we can work with you, it just wouldn't be attending school at that area. Grades 6 through 12, students must wear masks at all times on the bus, must wear masks at all times at the building, but what we tried to do was build in some breaks at the high school for students to get to remove their mask. So lunch would be one of those times. And then, for example, if a classroom goes outside and can social distance, say 6 feet apart, then those face coverings could be removed to allow for an additional break. So we'll work together with the health commissioner and the staff to plan for some breaks for those students. In general, then, we are asking families to provide masks for those students, but if students don't have them when they come to school, we will provide those. In terms of who doesn't need to wear a mask, and I think we've covered this at an earlier talk, but just to review that again, students who have a medical note that's provided to pupil services from a physician, nurse practitioner, or physician's assistant that indicates their medical condition, we'll work with those families individually, so you can contact us and we'll work through that. I know Mr. Sable talked about air conditioning. We are going to work on those 3 buildings, Claggett, Fenn, and Canavan, to look at the different options we have in terms of providing generators, air conditioning units. Due to the cost, we didn't look at that in the past as a consideration, but due to what is going on and due to the requirement of masks, we're going to look into that at all 3 of those locations. The next piece that'll be covered in the plan is cleaning and disinfecting and hand washing. What we're going to do to increase our availability for cleaning during the school day is move some of our later day custodians to the daytime. So we'll have an extra custodian during the day to clean, which will assist us with disinfecting during the day. So desks will be disinfected during lunch, during teacher plan periods, and after school. At the elementary, and then at every class change at middle and high school. We will have hand sanitizer and soap in every classroom, restroom, and entryway. Our buses will also be equipped. They were given permission to put hand sanitizers on the bus, so those will be installed. We will have several in-services on hand washing. We'll have videos and some other materials from Akron Children's that we'll post on our website and for staff. We also put in our plan here when you should wash your hands. Basically, it's all the time. We thought of a lot of different things, but this is from Akron Children's Hospital. If you want to keep going, Ryan. The next section is about busing, and I know Mr. Sable covered several changes are made to busing. So it's 2 students per seat, and as Mr. Sable shared, this really assisted us, but unfortunately, even with 2 to a seat, we do have to reduce high school busing and cut it at that level. Siblings are going to be required to be seated together. Students have to have an assigned seat, and masks will be required of every rider. So same thing as at school. If you don't have a mask when you get to the bus, we will provide you one, but you will not be able to ride the bus without a mask on. Weather permitting, we will open the windows on the bus at all times, and there are roof vents on the bus that we will open as well. I shared that we were able to install hand sanitizers inside the bus, so that will be of assistance as well. Just to provide some clarity in case there were any questions, I want to make sure people know students with special needs will still be transported as required by law, even though we are reducing high school busing. The seat behind the driver will remain empty at all times to allow for additional social distancing. We'll make sure to seat the preschool students up front. And then the buses will be filled from the back to the front. If you can go up a little bit, Ryan. I know someone had asked, Aaron, Mr. Sable talked about, can you go back up a little bit? Talked about reducing the fee at the high school, and I know someone had some concerns about would there be enough parking spots at the high school? We actually have plenty of parking at the high school, and there unfortunately was a time in the past when we also reduced high school busing, and we have some plans from that, some drop-off procedures, and also where we had more students driving. So again, not a case where we didn't charge a fee to park, but we do feel comfortable that we have plenty of parking spots and a good flow for additional drop-off. The buses will be cleaned additionally as well, the seats and other items. And then we also talked about doing some recommendations with the health commissioner in terms of, just because we've reduced busing, it really shouldn't be encouraging carpooling, because it would kind of reduce the purpose if kids are driving together when we're trying to socially distance.
Also, Dr. Quallich, I think it's important, in case members of the community do not know, that by reducing the busing at the high school, we're still in compliance with the state requirements for minimum busing, correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
we're actually still beyond state requirements. We run a 1 mile radius. State allows us to run a 2 mile radius with no busing to the high school. At this time, we're planning on keeping that 1 mile radius at the elementary buildings, as we're planning on keeping that 1 mile radius.
And even with that reduction, we're still going to be struggling to do 2 to a seat. So the increase in social distancing really does require a lot of busing changes. In terms of food service, again, the focus here is to try to reduce the traffic and the contacts. And again, with all of this, what you're really trying to do is reduce the number of contacts kids have and the number of movements in the building. So we're trying to explore, if we do box lunches, do you bring them to the classroom? How can we really reduce the amount of contact? So breakfast and lunch will be made available every day. And each building is going to look at what's best for them. Students may be required to eat in their classroom, but I want to assure parents we're still very aware of students with food allergies, and we'll be very careful and take those students into consideration. At the high school, we have vending machines, and we will put hand sanitizing stations near those vending machines so that those options can be pursued as well. Students can still pack their own lunches as well. And we will make sure that in the cafeteria, students have assigned seats, and those cannot and will not be changed, so that we can allow for contact tracing there as well. I know Mrs. Cassidy has done a really great job about looking at recess, because we know our students still need to get outside and still need movement, but how can we do that with making sure we're keeping students safe? So we want to make sure there's limited access to certain pieces of playground equipment that we wouldn't be able to clean or that are high touch. So we'll look into that. Looked at some great ideas like nature walks or other things that can limit contact but also get kids outside. Our custodians will be ready to disinfect equipment daily, and we will limit the number of students in each area at a time. We will also, this would be a great time before and after to thoroughly wash hands, so we'll make sure that's in process.
Dr. Quallich, we had talked about recess being eliminated at the middle schools. Is that still a go-ahead, or it was due to bringing on was that with the teaming?
Mm-hmm.
So will there still be recess
Yes.
at the middle school?
Yep, that was part of the teaming schedule, and so it's still in place at middle school.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So the other piece is similar to what I talked about. It's all about limiting exposure. So in order to limit exposure at the buildings, there will be no visitors or volunteers allowed in the classrooms or the buildings. We'll continue to have special education, IEP, and ETR meetings virtually. Again, it reduces the contact in the buildings and the visitors in the buildings. You'll see at the main office we have plexiglass for secretaries, so when teachers are down, it minimizes contact there as well. We are not going to allow food drop-off, so you can't order Jimmy John's for your child, because that'll limit the Jimmy John's driver, or bringing food to the classroom. No classroom parties or celebrations at this time, and no shared food. No food deliveries from outside establishments for staff or students at this time. No in-person field trips or assemblies until further notice. We are looking into our water stations. So a lot of you know our kids have done a great job raising money for those refillable water bottle stations. We need to see if we can turn off the water fountain piece but still use the refillable water bottle stations, because we did get permission from the health commissioner to use the refillable water bottle stations, but they're connected to the water fountain. So we need to see if we can bag one and not the other, so we make sure those stay safe. We want to let parents know Meet the Teacher Night this year will be held virtually, again, to minimize congregation and all the people there. And the building principals will get back to them about that. The media centers, we won't be doing book checkout, again, to limit contact there. And I feel like I'm saying a lot about what we won't do. But again, the hope is if we don't do some of these things, then we'll have kids back 5 days a week. So please keep that in mind. If you have to pick your child up for an appointment or a meeting, we ask that you wait outside, and then the student or the school will bring them to you. Again, it's limiting, because if we could get 20 or 30 people picking up their kids, that's 20 or 30 more people having contact in our building. So if we can bring the student to you, that helps a lot. In terms of attendance, that would be the next section up there. Attendance procedures would be the same for any other school year, but we ask that if you're filling out that COVID form and you see symptoms and you're concerned, that you call in your child. It would obviously be an excused absence, but as we're doing with athletics right now, if any symptoms on that COVID sheet are present, you're not going to be able to return to school unless you have a clearance from a doctor's note. And again, we've had that in place with athletics this summer, and it's worked well and has not been a major issue. This is a question we get a lot. We've reviewed this procedure with the health department, and we want to assure everyone, if someone becomes sick, we are going to work together with Akron Children's Hospital and our Akron Children's nursing staff, as well as the health department. So one of the procedures the board has put into place, because they care about this community and our students and staff, is we're moving to full-time nursing staff in each of our buildings. So during the hours when school is in place, we will have full-time nursing staff there. So if a student were to show symptoms of COVID or a staff member, we will be using our clinics as a area where they will be isolated and treated. So we have worked this summer with Akron Children's staff to turn those clinics into an isolation area, and then parents would pick them up or staff would go home. So it would be Akron Children's staff working with those students or staff, and then they will follow the procedures outlined from the health department to follow up. The custodial staff will then sanitize after the student or staff member is isolated. And any other issue other than COVID would be treated the same as before. So know that out of an abundance of caution, at some point, I know Mr. Sable covered this, the district may decide to close an individual school building, but we would be in contact with parents for that. Just so we're clear about this, and I think the health department does a fantastic job, but we are not the primary or secondary or at any point the contactors about COVID. It is the health commissioner and the health department. So you would not receive a call from Medina City Schools about COVID. You would get it from the health commissioner and the health department. That's how it's handled, and not the commissioner herself, but from the health department. So we want to make sure our families are aware how that process works, and it's different for every case.
So, for an example, let's say a student becomes sick during the day in the classroom. Say he does test positive, the child does test positive later. If anyone in that classroom would need to be quarantined, it would be the health department that would be contacting to let parents know that.
Correct. And the example I gave to the teachers is, say my child is in their class and they, because Medina's a tight community, they run into my daughter later who says, sorry, I was out, I had COVID. That teacher might never know because the health department determined they didn't have the contact needed. So I just want to make sure people know that might happen that way. It is up to the health department who needs to know, who needs to be tested. It would not be Medina City Schools. And there might be a time where Aaron and I are never contacted by the health commissioner because they determined that the school contact wasn't enough to contact us. So I just want to make sure that's clear, and I know Aaron might have more to share as well.
Yep, and in terms of if a child tests positive for COVID, does that close a whole classroom, a whole school? And the answer to that is most likely no. What happens is, first of all, the health department is going to make that decision, and they're going to do a contact trace. They're going to ask questions like, did the student have a mask on? Were the other students in the class wearing masks? And that'll determine to the extent that kids need to stay at home. So again, we're going to rely on the professionals in the industry to make those decisions in working with us.
Mr. Sable, could that also apply to something like perhaps the student was sitting in the front of the classroom, so all of the students behind them would never have any type of contact as well, correct?
Yep, they're going to want to have all the detailed information on the student and the student's interactions throughout the day. And that's one of the reasons why we're going to have things like assigned seating in a cafeteria, assigned seats in classrooms, things like that, so we always know where everybody is at.
Right, because I know, as someone pointed out, we know it's not just the classroom. If they went down to get their lunch, if they rode the bus. So that's why we're putting so many things in place that let us know where kids are, where they sat, and who they had contact with, and also trying to limit contact as much as we can. The other thing is we tried to put a piece in here. We collaborated with the health commissioner. A lot of the calls we got before the district was closed was about travel. Again, Mr. Sable and I can't tell someone they can't come back to school. Only the health commissioner can quarantine someone, but we wanted to provide some travel recommendations. So I know some parents would say, I know someone in my class is traveling. Do they have to come back to school? So this is just a section we thought would be helpful to parents in terms of travel. And we did this in collaboration with the health commissioner. And then these are the medical and other resources we used to put this document together. A couple of the other things that aren't necessarily in here but will come up with your buildings in terms of orientation. I know Link Crew is big, freshman orientation in the buildings. Those will all be dependent, and I know Mr. Sable said this, it's a really important point. A lot of things we can't tell you because it will be dependent on what's going on at the time. So if freshman orientation is where we're at and we're coming back 5 days a week, freshman orientation may look a lot like it did last year. If freshman orientation and we're set to come back online, it might look online. So a lot of things will depend on how we're looking at the time. And then the only other question I had that when I was looking at the questions is Thanksgiving to New Year's. I think, Mr. Sable, when we looked at that plan, it's really an option for us to go fully online, depending on what it looks like at that point, but we may be here. We just want the board to know we'd like that to be an option if possible during that break time. Since people do travel, there's some questions about where everyone's gone. But we really, again, I think the fluidity of this plan is the most important thing for people to know. None of us know where we'll be at.